is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie O.
And I'm Luigi Barkio. Our top stories: strengthening trade ties between China and the Philippines. The country's presidents meet in Beijing.
Our other headlines: European health officials discuss a response to travellers arriving from China as the EU says most countries are in favour of COVID checks.
Russia blames soldiers' use of mobile phones for the deadly attack that killed 89 recruits on New Year's Day.
Chaos on Capitol Hill as the fight to become Speaker in the US House of Representatives enters its second day.
And we're only in the office 3 days a week. The new data which shows how work-life balance is changing our cities.
President Xi Jinping says China is ready to resume oil and gas exploration talks with the Philippines and handle maritime issues in a cordial manner.
He's been meeting Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who's on a 3-day state visit to Beijing. Maritime security and territorial disputes have been a source of tension between the two countries. A number of trade deals have also been signed during the visit.
Economic ties between China and the Philippines have strengthened during the last few years. Despite the pandemic, China remains one of the Philippines' major economic partners. Total trade in goods between China and the Philippines rose 8.3% to over $80 billion during the first 11 months of 2022.
China remains the third largest export market for agricultural products from the Philippines, with produce like bananas, coconuts and pineapples the most popular.
While China continues to support new large-scale infrastructure projects in the Philippines under the Belt and Road Initiative, things like dams, bridges, railways and airports. Well, our correspondent Dong Shui has more on those meetings in Beijing.
Multiple deals were signed by the two heads of states under China's Belt and Road Initiative, in areas such as agriculture, infrastructure, finance, e-commerce, and tourism. Well, during the meeting, Chinese President Xi Jinping said that China is willing to work on maritime disputes through friendly consultations with the Philippines and to resume negotiations on oil and gas development in non-disputed areas and to carry out cooperation on renewable energies. Xi went on and said, China will also continue to import more high-quality agricultural and fishery products from the Philippines, and at the same time to support Chinese investments in the country. Well, according to President Xi, there is still huge potential for cooperation between the two countries. President Xi also spoke of his appreciation for former President Marcos, father of the current president, who helped to initiate the bilateral relations 48 years ago. President Marcos Jr., who was making his first bilateral visit to a non-ASEAN country, said that the Philippines attaches great significance to those ties with China. Before his arrival in Beijing, President Marcos said he'd be seeking, and I quote, to foster meaningful relations and broaden the cooperation in various areas such as agriculture, energy, infrastructure, science and technology, trade and investment, and more importantly, people-to-people exchanges. Well, talking to President Xi, Marcos said China is the Philippines' greatest partner, and he said, I quote, there is nothing that can prevent the friendship and development between China and the Philippines. He also expressed appreciation for China's help offered during the COVID-19 pandemic period. He said the Philippines is wide open to Chinese tourists, and he's looking forward to more people-to-people exchanges. During President Marcos' 48-hour visit to Beijing, he had also met with the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang and Chairman Li Zhanshu of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. They also exchanged views on bilateral relations and regional and international issues of mutual interest.
Rafi Tima is a Filipino journalist. I asked him about the importance of the trade relationship.
Well, this visit is significant for both countries. One, because of potential economic benefits the Philippines will get from over 10 bilateral agreements expected to be signed between the two countries. that focuses mostly in boosting economic ties between China and the Philippines. Tourism is one aspect the Philippines hopes to cash in from millions of potential Chinese tourists, although the recent COVID surge in China has somehow dampened the expectation. But in the long run, tourism cooperation will greatly benefit the Philippines.
And how important is that tourism link? I mean, China getting ready to open up international travel from Sunday. Just how important is it for the Philippines when it comes to Chinese tourists?
Yeah, it's very significant because before the pandemic in 2019, there were around 1.7 million Chinese visitors to the Philippines. And the government hopes that this number will return as travel restrictions have eased. A huge part of the Philippines' refusal to impose travel restrictions on China despite the COVID surge is because the government wants to jumpstart the international tourism industry badly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2021, only around 10,000 Chinese tourists arrived in the Philippines, and so the government expects or hopes that those numbers will increase this year.
And there are plenty of external forces when it comes to shaping the relationship, but how do you expect the economic and business trade relationship to develop moving forward?
Yeah, well, in this state visit, more or less 10 to 14 bilateral agreements are expected to be signed during the Marcos state visit, including agreements on nickel processing, possible grants of around 12 billion pesos, a renewal of an agreement on the Philippines' participation in the Belt and the Road Initiative of China, and the digital cooperation and the exchange of best practices in digital connectivity and emerging technologies. Marcos is also seeking for cooperation on agriculture, energy, and of course infrastructure, of which China has promised a lot from the previous administration but has not fully delivered. And so the Marcos administration hopes that with this state visit, aside from new promises and pledges, that China will honor its previous commitments of building huge ticket infrastructure projects in the Philippines.
The world's biggest airline trade body has criticised the reintroduction of the coronavirus restrictions on travellers from China.
The head of the IATA, Willie Walsh, says such measures proved to be ineffective in preventing the spread of the virus over the last 3 years. More countries are seeking to tighten border controls on arrivals from China as Beijing lifts travel restrictions on its citizens this week, despite a wave of new infections.
Meanwhile, the European Commission says most EU countries are in favour of reintroducing pre-departure COVID testing for passengers travelling from China. EU health officials are discussing a coordinated response to the rise in Chinese infections. Let's talk to our correspondent Peter Oliver, following the story in Berlin. Peter, what sort of measures are likely to be introduced by EU member states?
Well, the measures fall into two camps, really. On one side, you've got those that will directly impact passengers. On the other, you've got those that don't, but will check on things like variants and genomes. But we'll get to those that will directly impact the passengers first. This is things like pre-departure COVID PCR tests and the wearing of masks on flights. It does seem like an awful lot of EU member states want to see pre-departure PCR tests. That's based on a meeting that took place on Tuesday of the Health and Security Committee. Now, that's made up of representatives from the health ministries of all 27 EU member states and is chaired by the EU Commission. That was ahead of a meeting that's taking place right now, as I'm speaking to you, where they're trying to hammer out an overarching EU policy on this, because there isn't one as of yet, because there are some splits, and the splits come between countries like Italy, Spain and France, who want to see more and more restrictions placed on passengers, I beg your pardon, coming from China, and countries like Germany and Austria, who aren't all that keen on putting these restrictions in place and would prefer to see them limited to things like checking the wastewater from flights and what's called genomic surveillance, basically to check for any new variants. Now, Germany's particularly keen on that. We've heard from the Health Minister, Karl Lauterbach, speaking here in Berlin. Now, he was one of the most cautious people ever in the last few years when it's come to the COVID pandemic. For him to be taking this view is something quite a shock here in Berlin, quite here in Germany. But he says the biggest concern is to make sure that there is no new variants emerging, that putting in place new testing isn't necessary right now.
And can you give us a sense of the reaction?
Well, the reaction from China is they're not particularly happy about this whatsoever. In fact, we've heard it described as discriminatory and unreasonable from Beijing. They've pointed to European findings from themselves when it comes to how scientific the ideas of placing new measures, restrictions on passengers are. The European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control said that the variants that exist in China, the variants that are currently spreading throughout China in this wave of COVID-19, already exist in Europe, and that Europeans are already seeing these variants, that there already is a high level of vaccination against these variants in Europe. And what we have literally just heard in the last hour from the World Health Organization is that the current findings are that there are no new variants in the wave of COVID-19 that's going across China at the moment. So what they're saying is that essentially it isn't a scientific means to put in place these new measures, that it is purely political. Beijing not happy about it, and well, it's likely they're not going to be happy about it once a decision is made. It's probably likely we are going to see a unified European approach when the meeting of the EU health officials finishes in Europe later on Wednesday. That meeting's still continuing right now. We'll be looking to see what comes out of it.
Peter, thank you for that. Our correspondent Peter Oliver in Berlin.
China is fighting a wave of coronavirus following the loosening of lockdowns. Rural health services are bracing for a surge in infections. Our correspondent Yu Li visited a medical centre to find out how officials are coping.
This is a typical grassroots medical institution seen in northern townships. The hospital provides medical services to 18,000 permanent residents in 33 villages.
When we arrived at the hospital, the doctors were distributing medicine to village heads who were responsible for delivering it to villagers. The medicine has been purchased using local government funds and will be handed out to every family for free. Zhang Haijun, director of the hospital, leads a team of 15 doctors. He says their workload has surged since mid-December.
The number of outpatients has increased tenfold, and the hospitalization rate is about 50% right now. It has not yet reached its peak.
Zhang estimates the peak period will come soon, but says the hospital is already well prepared for possible emergencies.
I think the peak will arrive around the Spring Festival, because people will be traveling and the chance of infection will increase, so have taken corresponding measures, including adding hospital beds, consulting rooms and some first aid equipment like oxygen, an electrocardiogram, oximeter and so on.
Zhang says the hospital has 2 ambulances on standby at any given time, and critically ill patients can be sent to larger hospitals in time. But he hopes to equip the hospital with a CT machine to help diagnose villagers and to relieve pressure on large hospitals where waiting for a CT scan may take several days. Yu Li, CGTN, Jilin County, Liaoning Province.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the fight to become Speaker in the US House of Representatives enters its second day after hardline Republicans block their own party's candidate.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans, grey rhinos, and unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world. accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. A quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
The United States House of Representatives has been left in chaos after it failed to elect a new speaker.
Republican nominee Kevin McCarthy was repeatedly blocked from taking up the role by hardline members of his own party. Our correspondent Nathan King reports from Capitol Hill.
Well, what should have been the crowning of a new Republican Speaker of the House of Representatives here behind me was a day that essentially ended in chaos. Elections have consequences, and as you know, the predicted red wave of congressional victories in the midterm elections last November did not happen. A red puddle, a red dribble. So that left Republicans with a majority in the House of just a few seats. Now, as we know, it's a fractious party divided by right and left and middle. Well, Kevin McCarthy is not a popular choice, although he thought the votes, but a small minority, largely right-wing, MAGA Republicans who want all sorts of guarantees, including the ability to overthrow the speakership on a whim and introduce legislation, held out and wanted these terms. He said no. It came to the floor, not once, not twice, but 3 times. His party did not have enough votes to make him House Speaker. This hasn't happened for 100 years. Last time it took 9 ballots. Well, the House will reconvene at noon going forward on Wednesday, but it doesn't look like at the moment they've come to a deal. There may be some sort of deal, but if not, what happens? This is almost unprecedented. Will there be another candidate? Will Democratic votes be needed to carry him over the line? What is revealing is that McCarthy says he will fight to the end.
I will always fight to put the American people first, not a few individuals that want something for themselves. So we may have a battle on the floor, but the battle is for the conference and the country, and that's fine with me.
But this is obviously a very, very bad, at least PR exercise for Republicans. They had battled hard and said they could govern here in Washington. The first taste of power they've had in a few years with taking over the majority in the House of Representatives, and they can't even agree on who is going to lead their party in that House. And nothing can happen while this election is up. Essentially no legislation, no investigations, nothing. This is not a good example if they want to take the White House and the Senate. Nathan King, CGTN on Capitol Hill.
Well, let's stay in the United States because regulators there have warned banks to be wary of cryptocurrencies, saying the sector carries a contagion risk. Financial institutions have been told to watch for fraud, legal uncertainty and misleading disclosures. Let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett, watching events in New York.
Yeah.
John, well, this is a pretty blunt warning from the watchdogs.
I know, and they've clearly been listening to us on the Global Business Report out of Europe, because we've been saying this, haven't we, all year. I've said time and time again, cryptocurrency is not the Wild West, it is the wild, wild, wild West. And so it's turned out to be. And indeed, cryptocurrency has turned into the emperor's new clothes. You know, the children's fable where the little girl is watching the parade go by with her parents and the emperor's up on his horse and the parents are going, look at his clothes, aren't they magnificent, isn't he handsome? And the little girl goes, actually, he's naked. And the parents are going, ha, ha, thank you so much. Quiet, quiet. He didn't mean it. But in fact, it turned out that he was naked, and this is what exactly has happened now with cryptocurrency. So today, 3 key regulators here, in a very unusual move, have got together to issue a warning, all 3 of them. This is the US Federal Reserve, which you know is the central bank, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, which guarantees any money you might have in a bank here, and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, which is a Treasury Department. And they're saying, look out if you invest in cryptocurrency for fraud, legal uncertainty, and misleading disclosure, and a risk of investing in it, and that contagion risk that you mentioned in the light of the collapse of FTX a couple of weeks ago. Now, just today, Coinbase, which is a company based in San Francisco but doesn't really have any offices, has been fined $50 million by the authorities in New York for failing to do background checks on people that joined its service, and another $50 million, bringing it to $100 million in total, another fine on them to boost up their compliance going forward. Now, the regulators here have been very keen to bring in some kind of regulation on cryptocurrency, but it's difficult for them because they don't know whether it's a stock, is it a bond, is it a commodity, or is it something else. I think in the future, look out for something called the CBDC, which is the central bank digital currency. Biden has a working party on this, and there are other CBDCs being engineered at the moment in other countries around the world. Basically, the view of the cryptocurrency enthusiast, which was to have an unfettered form of financial transfer without governments looking over your shoulder, that has gone, okay? Regulation is coming. And I have an exclusive for you here because a friend of mine dined out last night in New York with a former head of the SEC, the leading regulator. I won't name him, but I could if you wanted to. He told my friend that he thinks, this is a former head of the leading regulator in New York last night, saying that he thinks the only companies in the crypto sector that will survive are those that are, and I quote, properly built out and properly infrastructured. In other words, companies that are surrounded by legislation like any other financial corporation. Guys?
John, let's put that aside to one moment and ask you about scenes behind the Fed, because we're about to see all, aren't we?
Yeah, well, yeah, sort of, because what happens, there's a ritual here with the central bank when it comes to interest rates. They're very chatty, talking to the media left and right. Then they go into purdah for 2 weeks. Then they have a meeting to discuss what they're going to do about interest rates. And the last one was just before Christmas, and they raised them by 50 basis points here. Then the boss of the bank, Jerome Powell, has a little news conference. And then 2 weeks later, they release the minutes so we can all read exactly what people thought in that meeting. And it's a clue about which member of the committee is very hawkish, as Americans say, and which member of the committee is very dovish. So we get those at 19 hours GMT today, which is in about 2.5 hours. Now, here's the question. Powell has been very chatty and very hawkish, saying we're going to, go on raising interest rates until we get inflation down to 2%. We don't care. We're going to cause unemployment if necessary. It's important to get inflation down. The thing is, he's been talking the talk, but will he walk the walk? Now, last year we had 7 interest rate hikes. 4 of them were jumbo size. We're expecting 50 basis points, or these people are, when they meet again in February. But there's a battle now between Wall Street and the Fed, because it's a battle between companies that are slowing down, like Salesforce today, which is a major Dow component that is laying off 10% of its workers because it overhired in the pandemic. And on the other hand, mass hiring that is going on in other industries. You can't really have a recession if you've got as much hiring going on here, which there is still, despite the tech layoffs that you're hearing about. The big question for Wall Street, will they pause raising interest rates at all? Wall Street hopes they will. They want a little break from all of this. They're hoping they'll do that in March, but we don't know. The one thing we can say for certainty, though, finally, is that U.S. interest rates will not go down in 2023. They will remain elevated at around 5%. But compared to the history of the last 30 years, 5% is really not very much, really. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, we had interest rates of around 18%. So if you compare it to then, it isn't so bad. But given what we've been used to, 2% for the last 20 or 30 years, it's elevated.
John, we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for that. Our correspondent, John Terrett, in New York.
The founder of collapsed cryptocurrency exchange FTX has pleaded not guilty to defrauding investors. Sam Bankman-Fried faces 8 criminal counts, including wire fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering. His trial is due to take place in October, and he could face up to 115 years in prison if convicted.
Meta has been fined more than $400 million for breaching EU data laws on Facebook and Instagram. Ireland's data privacy regulator says the tech giant used an incorrect legal basis for its processing of personal data for the purpose of behavioural advertising. Meta plans to appeal against the ruling.
Microsoft now has its first official labour union in the United States. A majority of workers at ZeniMax, a gaming studio owned by the tech giant, voted to unionise, and Microsoft agreed to recognise the group. It follows an increase in unionisation across the US, including at major companies like Apple, Amazon and Google.
China's CATL has extended its lead as the world's top electric vehicle battery maker. The company, which supplies Volkswagen and Tesla, accounted for over 37% of global sales in the first 11 months of 2022. That's up from 32% the year before. That means Chinese producers occupy the top 2 spots with a combined 50% share of the market. Second place, BYD, tripled its sales over the same period.
Inflation in France unexpectedly fell below 7% in December from a record high a month earlier. It's the latest sign that slowing energy price rises are helping Europe overcome the worst of the cost of living crisis. Germany's inflation fell for a second month in a row in December, while Spain released lower inflation figures last week.
Price of gold has extended its New Year rally to jump more than 1%, hitting the highest level since June. And analysts predict it will continue to rise throughout the year.
It peaked at just above $1,850 per ounce on Wednesday. Gold prices have been gradually increasing since November as investors opt for safe havens amid economic uncertainty. Let's get more on this. Nitesh Shah is head of commodities and macroeconomic research at Wisdom Tree. Welcome back to the programme, Nitesh. So once again, investors turning to gold in times of crises. Just why is it so attractive?
Yeah, gold has always been an asset that people turn to in terms of crisis, in terms of uncertainty. It acts as a great hedge against financial uncertainty, geopolitical uncertainty, and indeed is seen as that sort of defensive asset. During 2022, people expected a little bit more from gold, given how high inflation was, because gold often acts as that counterbalance to inflation, but it faced strong headwinds from rising treasury yields and an appreciating dollar. In the last month or so, we've been seeing the dollar and treasury yields, actually the dollar depreciate and treasury yields come off, which has actually helped gold increase in price. So gold is getting its moment in the sun right now because more things are sitting in its favor. While inflation is taming, it's still at quite elevated levels.
And it's not the only game in town, though. It's faced some strong competition from cryptocurrencies in recent years. I just wanted to get your thoughts on whether crypto offers a realistic threat or whether you think gold will keep on shining.
Yeah, a lot of people draw the parallels between gold and cryptocurrencies in the sense that they are pseudo-currencies that are competitors to fiat money, dollars issued by the Federal Reserve or yen or, euro notes, for example. But it's not, issued by a central bank. Its supply is very much fixed by how much gold can be mined out of the ground. And the parallel in the cryptocurrency world is how much cryptocurrency can be mined or created, which is generally fixed by design. So for those reasons, people draw the parallels. But unfortunately, that's where it really stops. If you look at the behavior between gold and the cryptocurrencies, they're vastly different. Cryptocurrencies tend to be a lot more volatile in terms of in terms of price behavior. they tend to be less defensive. In fact, if anything, they tend to be pro-cyclical. And that was really illustrated in the second half of 2022, when cryptocurrencies really started to take a large drawdown, whereas gold held quite steady. So I think that investor shift towards cryptocurrencies away from gold has probably come closer to an end. And people, but what people are recognizing is that there are complementary asset classes. They do different things, and therefore could be combined into a portfolio to provide those different traits.
And prices have been rising in recent months. Final question then, what's your outlook for gold in 2023?
Yeah, so we expect, while inflation will continue to tame, it will remain way above most central banks' target levels. So if inflation remains at around 3.5–4% by the end of this year, and treasury yields continue to decline, so moving to around 3.4% on the 10-year for the US, up from down from 3.6% today. And the dollar continues to depreciate to around, the dollar basket of around 100 or around 104 today. That should give gold a sufficient sort of tailwind to move to around 1950 by the end of this year. But I wouldn't even rule out 2000 by the end of this year, with those things holding in its favor.
Thanks, Nitesh. That's Nitesh Shah, Head of Commodities and Macroeconomic Research at Wisdom Tree.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, how much difference does 6 months make? CGTN revisits Zaporizhzhia and some of the people we met last summer.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, in the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Louise Jabarkle. Our top stories. Strengthening trade ties between China and the Philippines. The two countries' presidents meet in Beijing.
European health officials discuss a response to travellers arriving from China, as the EU says most countries are in favour of COVID checks.
And Russia blames soldiers' use of mobile phones for the deadly attack that killed 89 recruits on New Year's Day. Ukraine's president is warning that Russia is set to launch a major new offensive.
Volodymyr Zelensky believes Moscow will throw everything they have left at Ukraine and that his country must be prepared. His remarks come as Kyiv says Russia has launched more than 100 attacks on civilian infrastructure across 3 cities in the past 24 hours, and troops continue to advance in the city of Bakhmut.
Well, our correspondent Stephanie Freed is in Zaporizhzhia and has sent us this report.
About an advance based on what we understand are intel observations, reports along Ukraine's northern borders with Belarus, with Russia. We've been hearing these reports for months, and at the same time, we're hearing reports that Ukraine is planning an advance right here in this area around Zaporizhzhia and about 130 kilometers south of here in Melitopol. So it's tough to know exactly who's going to advance and when. But what we are hearing from Ukraine intelligence is that Russia is planning a new a mass wave of mobilization on Thursday. Now, again, we've also been hearing that for the past weeks. But we're hearing that from inside of Russia, there has been a suggestion of shutting the borders so that there won't also be a mass migration with a mass mobilization. If there is going to be an advance on either side, the winter months, the conventional wisdom is split. Winter months are the best. Frozen ground, tanks that move across frozen ground and mechanized units. At the same time, the freezing cold temperatures are hell for the troops, and they can be very difficult mechanically. Hearing the explosions overnight here in the city, overnight Tuesday night, between Tuesday and Wednesday, we did get a report of a Russian base that was hit, a Russian installation in the Zaporizhzhia region. And again, I'm talking about these mass drone waves and strikes. One casualty, one person injured here in Zaporizhzhia, and an explosion overnight. And again, Volodymyr Zelensky saying, as well as talking about the advance, he's also talking about an expectation that these kamikaze drone advances or drone launches, that they're going to continue. You know, I was talking about the frozen winter months, the winter weather, and Ukrainians that we speak with for months, they've been talking about their apprehensions, the civilians around frozen warfare in freezing cold temperatures because of knocking out power, knocking out heat. And sometimes, or many times, meeting these people, the way they express their apprehensions and their fears, it's hard to forget. Let's take a look at this story. When we visited Lena, she was gardening in humid 28 degrees Celsius heat. She was also storing logs to use for winter heating and cooking. In August, she was nervous about the power grid a few hundred meters away being targeted, but assured, I'll be okay this winter. What our story didn't show was Lena's tears as we said goodbye. The tears led us to believe that perhaps she was concerned about the upcoming winter, so we decided to check back in on her. For the most part, Lena is okay. She's got supplies, electricity, and enough logs and sunflower husk briquettes to heat her place for the time being. Compared with people living in other parts of Ukraine, Lena and the approximately 8,000 residents of her settlement have been relatively unscathed by relentless Russian strikes. But if the country's overall status shifts dramatically...
We can't reveal our plans and methods, but we're preparing for a major blackout.
She may run out of supplies.
We don't know what will happen, how cold the deeper winter frosts may be, or how much we'll need to get by.
There have been blasts, blackouts, and sleepless nights permeated by blaring air raid sirens.
On the one hand, we are used to it, but when the booms are really loud, it's still scary.
Her rescue dog Lera has developed heart problems she blames on the recurring explosions. She has only seen her son, who is serving in Ukraine's army, 3 times in 9 months. But she says she's lucky to have work as a hospital orderly, to have a stove for cooking her favorite foods, and homemade wine she makes from her harvested grapes. This time, when we said goodbye, Lena didn't cry. Stephanie Fried, CGTN, Kushugum, Ukraine.
Russia has blamed soldiers using their mobile phones for a New Year's Day missile attack at a barracks that killed 89 servicemen. The death toll given by the Russian Defense Ministry is higher than earlier reports of 63. CGTN's correspondent Dasha Chernyshova reports from Moscow.
The use of mobile phones, according to the Russian Defense Ministry, has allowed the Ukrainian side to track and coordinate the location of the Russian soldiers and to carry out a strike using US-supplied HIMARS systems. Now, that was not allowed to use mobile phones and that location. The Russian Defense Ministry stresses that. However, that took place. And the Russian civil society and the Russian officials are all demanding the answers to why that actually was possible. They are saying that there has to be a criminal investigation or any other sort of analysis of why that happened in order to make sure that that doesn't happen in future. Now, according to the Russian Defense Ministry, they are already carrying out the investigation, and there is the commission that is looking into the reasons, that is looking into who was responsible for that, because the Russian society is indeed mounting its pressure to demand to bring to justice those who allowed that to happen. Now, there are many questions about the incidents, but what they say was that the use of mobile phones was something that could have been easily prevented. Now, there are also questions about how that was possible, that such a large number of the servicemen were in one unprotected place, why the air defense systems didn't work properly, and what was doing the intelligence and counterintelligence. So all of these questions put together are indeed raising the tension, but also the Russian society is fearing that the death toll might be changing, because the Russian Defense Ministry provided one figure the day before, then these figure has increased, and now there are fears that since there was no mention of how many people were wounded, this death toll could actually be higher. Now, as the Russian society is demanding answers to the incident in Makeivka over the death of the Russian soldiers and the servicemen, the Russian president has sent off the frigate that is equipped with the hypersonic Zircon missiles. Now, according to the Russian officials, those Zircon missiles have no analogs worldwide. They can fly at 9 times the speed of sound, and they can actually not be seen by any air defense system. So the Russian officials are stressing that they have no analogs. It was promised that those Zircons will be provided to the Russian army this year, but of course this happening in the first days of January are raising questions on the timing. However, the Russian president has stressed that this addition of Zircons would provide for the security of the Russian Federation, that will be ensuring that the Russian Federation is capable of providing for its national interests. So indeed, a very significant event, not just because of the event itself, but because of the timing.
The British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has been laying out his vision for the rest of this Parliament.
He's been stressing the importance of innovation and education to foster growth and take advantage of Brexit. But he's under pressure to address the crisis in the National Health Service and the wave of strikes in the public sector. Our correspondent Andrew Wilson watched the Prime Minister's speech. What was Mr Sunak trying to achieve then with all of this?
This is the point where Rishi Sunak has to, as they call it in politics, define himself. We've been talking about this last week, and we were talking about it even at the end of last year, that there's calls from his backbenchers, what do you stand for? There's calls from the public, what's your plan going forward? This government has found itself under Rishi Sunak caught between firefighting against strike problems, industrial disturbance problems, national health problems and so on, always putting out fires rather than coming up with some sort of sense of policy. Now, the Tories, as we know, are doing very badly in the polls. Labour are much ahead, the main opposition party. However, Rishi Sunak, on an individual level, is doing much better than his party, and he's more neck and neck with the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. So he's in a slightly awkward but comfortable position, if you like. But he does need to step up and bring out. And this was his answer today in a fairly organised, quiet, low-key, journalists were there, press conference stroke speech, where he mapped out what he hoped people would accept as his agenda for 2023. Have a listen to this.
So I want to make 5 promises to you today. 5 pledges to deliver peace of mind. 5 foundations on which to build a better future for our children and grandchildren. First, we will halve inflation this year to ease the cost of living and give people financial security. Second, we will grow the economy, creating better paid jobs and opportunity right across the country. Third, we will make sure our national debt is falling so that we can secure the future of public services. Fourth, NHS waiting lists will fall and people will get the care they need more quickly. Fifth, we will pass new laws to stop small boats, making sure that if you come to this country illegally, you are detained and swiftly removed.
He does have this kind of nice guy delivery, which I think he feels will be effective. No tricks, no ambiguity, he said. We will rebuild trust in politics through action or not at all. And he kept on saying throughout the speech, you can call me to account on this if I don't deliver. But let's have a look at some of those ambitions. Cutting inflation by half, well, that's simply a Bank of England forecast. There's nothing special, nothing political about that. That's already been laid down. Tackling debts, well, that's already been forecast to be 4 or 5 years away. Growing the economy, no growth expected in 2023, possibly 2024. So really what Rishi Sunak is go through a list of hopes and intentions rather than necessarily laying out something. And with it, there was no explanation about what it is, how he's going to achieve these goals, or what he's going to do to change things. No talk about the tax system, about infrastructure, no talk about childcare, about planning, other issues that are getting long in the tooth, not being dealt with, that still stay on the back burner.
While the Prime Minister was getting up and delivering that speech, the UK Finance Minister, Jeremy Hunt, was meeting business leaders who are very concerned about the support for their businesses on the cost of fuel coming to an end. Do we know anything more about what came out of that meeting?
Well, it was. I can imagine a lot of people were very honest with the Chancellor, the Finance Minister, Jeremy Hunt, in this meeting. Business community has become very frustrated of late. This is about how the government's been covering a large amount of the energy costs for the business community, and that pledge to do that expires in March of this year. And they're saying that we're now facing difficulties beyond that. They also say that the wait in getting a response from the government has been corrosive to business confidence in the country. So it could have been a fairly stormy meeting. Now, the government will actually report on this next week, so we'll hear exactly what their plan is. The costs of supporting or helping business with its energy costs over the last 6 months, 6 months to March 23, was about $22 billion. Now, the government doesn't want to keep spending at that sort of rate, so it may come in with something like 6 months at the same sort of rate, or possibly a guarantee of a year cover at half the rate it's been giving now. So the same sort of cost, another $22 billion. Nothing really changed there, but perhaps stretching it out over a bit longer. Whether or not that's sustainable, the Treasury will be looking with great anxiety at those sort of numbers. The one thing the government does have in its favour is that the price of gas is actually, wholesale, is considerably lower than it was. It's back down to the price it was before the Ukraine war started. It's still much higher year-on-year average going back a few years, but nonetheless there are signs that any kind of commitment to business will cost the Treasury less than it might have thought, say, a couple of months ago, which is probably why they delayed, to see where things are going and how they'll get on. But there's no doubting the frustration that's coming from the business community. Said we really need to sort this out. We're not sure how we can do business. Business, remember, is separate from domestic. There's a different deal for domestic energy crisis, and there's an energy cap for domestic energy supplies. So that's a completely different deal. This is businesses going to the Chancellor that aren't normally protected by these kind of schemes, saying you're going to have to see us beyond March into deep into 2023 if this is going to work for us.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Our correspondent, Andrew Wilson.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. War, corruption and an energy crisis. If 2022 was challenging for the EU, the new year might be just as tricky.
I fell in love with Chinese culture the second I started to experience it.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
Building bridges is a natural thing. There is no age and gender difference in our spirit, no race difference in our soul.
I think food is an incredible way of bringing different cultures together. I am enjoying learning every aspect about it.
Chinese literature stretches back for millennia, but it's still really relevant for today.
I hope that Chinese and British fashion community could be more frequently communicating with each other.
An incredible mix of people, cultures, food, and there is so much to see and so much to do.
I have a great desire to make the Chinese civilization more accessible.
It's about our future generation's future.
The craftsmanship, the technique, the material uses, the color uses.
You can kind of take things on board and continue to develop and grow.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dare to think beyond the horizon and open up our world.
Everything seems to have a story. I just think that's absolutely beautiful. A huge tick.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. The lockdowns may be over in many parts of the world, but working from home may be here to stay, for part of the week at least.
A new study of mobile phone data has found that people are in areas with high office density from Tuesday to Thursday, while there's much more activity in suburbs and seaside towns on Mondays and Fridays. Well, let's talk now to Shlum Chakkup, who masterminded this phone data at the heart of this research. So welcome to the programme. What does your research say about the future of our big cities and all of that office space?
Well, to be clear, the high street is not dead, and actually many places have become even more active than before. But there's been a clear bifurcation into places that have thrived and places that have declined. And in many cases, that growth or decline has been profound. The places that have thrived have been dynamic, embody a more diverse and balanced mix of uses, for example, residential, office, and retail, have benefited from placemaking efforts and investments, and offer varied and meaningful reasons to visit. So, for example, one major factor in the growth or decline of a particular place is the overrepresentation of offices in the texture of the built environment. By crowding out alternative uses, such as experiential retail, that would attract a broader population of workers and non-workers, during and outside of working hours. A place that is overly dominated by offices can be dull, uninviting, and dormant in the evenings and on weekends. So what we're seeing is a major shift, structural shift, in the purpose of the high street. So, for example, there's less reason now to visit a shop. Department stores have shut. Hybrid working is now fully ingrained, and the mid-work week has become a prevailing working pattern. And so what is demanded of the high street has changed. And these structural shifts appear to be permanent, meaning that how we envision the high street will need to change in response.
OK, for a technophobe dimwit like me, just explain how your research works. So you're looking at phone data times and locations.
Correct. Mobile phones are constantly tracking locations. These location data points are being fed into data aggregation algorithms that then pull together all the location data from could be hundreds or thousands of different apps, app publishers across millions of devices to track locations over time.
This is all rather good news for our rural and our coastal communities, isn't it, where we now seem to prefer to spend our time. I mean, these were once referred to by reporters as declining communities. Your research suggests that it's cities, perhaps, which might be worried now.
Yeah, so there could be a bifurcation there, but it has more to do with the texture of the built environment. So, for example, places that within the city that have a good diversity of uses may still thrive, just as some seaside towns may not for other reasons. But what is really driving it is just that the quality of the built environment and the diversity of uses.
Shlum, thank you so much for talking to us. If only we had much more time, but thanks so much for coming on the programme, and good luck with your research. Shlum Chakput, who carried out that research.
Thanks for having me.
2022 was a challenging year for the European Union, from the pandemic and the Russian invasion of Ukraine to a huge corruption scandal.
Europe will have to face up to those challenges and others, of course, in 2023. Our correspondent Alex Cadier reports now from Brussels.
Make no mistake, the European Parliament, dear colleagues, is under attack. European democracy is under attack. And our way of open, free, democratic societies are under attack.
This stark warning by the President of the European Parliament will still be ringing in the ears of European leaders as they look towards 2023. For most of this past year, the EU was focused on responding to external threats and global challenges. But a high-level corruption scandal is certain to rumble right into next year. Eva Kaili, the Vice President of the European Parliament, has been accused, along with 3 others, of bribery, money laundering and criminal organisation by Belgian authorities. Observers say the fallout of this scandal and the reforms that will follow will likely be a key challenge for the EU in 2023.
The European Union is at a shaky point. They've already experienced Brexit. They have issues within their own boundaries with respect to Hungary and other complicated issues, and they're obviously dealing with an economic crisis due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They're dealing with a lot of challenges, and they don't need their legitimacy to be called into question. So the European Union needs a very serious reform effort, and they need it immediately.
The other fallout from Russia's offensive in Ukraine has been the EU's energy crisis, which has in turn led to record-breaking inflation. While tackling high energy bills will be a key challenge for the EU in 2023, it will also go hand in hand with increased pressure on the bloc to transition to green energy faster and take responsibility for its emissions.
The ambition level that has been agreed on now is still far off what is actually needed for the 1.5 goal of the Paris agreements. Europe is a major historic emitter. It has huge responsibility in the global fight against the climate crisis.
Part of that green transition will involve a boost for electric vehicles. But even that comes with challenges. The EU is keen to reduce its reliance on other countries for the import of raw materials that are essential for the production of smartphones, electric cars and a number of high-tech products.
2022 was a year of shocking twists and turns for the European Union, a year when EU leaders had to scramble to respond to dramatic and unexpected events on a global scale. And while the challenges facing the European Union at the start of 2023 all started last year, the focus will be on making those crucial structural changes on energy, on fighting corruption, on supporting Ukraine to ensure the EU is not just able to weather the global challenges, but can restructure and rebuild to get ahead of them in the long run. Alex Cadier, CGTN, Brussels.
Winter heat records were broken in several European countries across the new year. January temperatures reached new highs in at least 8 countries, including Spain and Poland. In Bilbao, in Spain, the mercury hit almost 25 degrees Celsius, a temperature usually seen in the city in July. The mild weather has raised concern among weather experts, who say it's the most extreme climatology event ever seen in Europe.
Tributes are being paid to the United States astronaut Walter Cunningham, who's died at the age of 90. He was the last surviving member of NASA's Apollo 7, which was the first Apollo mission with a human crew. The 11-day mission in low Earth orbit in 1968 helped pave the way for man to land on the moon less than a year later. NASA paid tribute to Cunningham, calling him instrumental to their moon landings program's success.
Our headlines again. Strengthening trade ties between China and the Philippines. The country's president meets in Beijing.
And that is it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.